Have you ever wondered what happens after two neighbors have a deeply destructive, bitter fight? How do they actually go back to living next door to each other once the yelling stops and the fence is shattered? That was exactly the situation in Europe right after the First World War. The guns had finally fallen silent, and the soldiers had gone home, but the absence of fighting did not mean that true peace had arrived. Instead of a handshake, the war ended with the Treaty of Versailles. You can think of it like a harsh court order. It officially closed the conflict, but it placed almost all the blame and the massive financial cost squarely on Germany. For France, having suffered immense devastation, this strict ruling felt like a necessary security measure. They wanted an absolute guarantee that their neighbor could never grow strong enough to threaten them again. But for Germany, the treaty was a dictated punishment. They were forced to sign it under the threat of invasion, leaving them with a deep sense of humiliation and resentment. If you force a neighbor to pay for a broken window by taking them to court, the judge's ruling might settle the bill, but the two families are still going to glare at each other across the property line. One is left bitter, and the other is left bolting their doors at night in fear. A peace agreement signed with a gun to your head is really just a temporary pause in the fighting. The underlying anger and mistrust remain, making it impossible to build a stable, long-lasting community. Recognizing this problem, European leaders decided to try a completely new approach. In 1925, they gathered in the sunny, neutral town of Locarno, Switzerland. Their goal was simple but ambitious: Saza ki jaga dosti, friendship instead of punishment. The people sitting down at this table were the bitterest of rivals, representatives from Germany, France, and Belgium. Together, they hammered out the Locarno Pact. The most important piece of this agreement was that Germany willingly accepted its western borders with France and Belgium, promising to respect the lines drawn on the map. It was an explicit promise from all sides. They looked at that specific borderline and agreed they would never go to war over it again. Of course, promises are just words on paper. If someone decided to break the agreement and step over the line, who would make sure the victim was protected? To solve this, they brought in two outside neighbors to act as objective guarantors: Great Britain and Italy. Britain and Italy formed a kind of neighborhood watch. They pledged that if any nation attacked another across that newly agreed-upon border, they would use their own militaries to defend a victim, regardless of who threw the first punch. The true power of this treaty came from how it was made. Nobody was forcing Germany to sign this document. They were choosing to do it. By voluntarily shaking hands over the fence, Germany was finally treated as an equal partner at the table. The cycle of one-sided, dictated punishments had come to an end. The immediate aftermath of the pact felt like a heavy weight lifting off the continent. For the first time in over a decade, genuine trust began to replace the lingering fear. This newfound trust paved the way for the very next big step involving the League of Nations, or Rostrasong. Set up after World War I, this international organization acted as a global peace club designed specifically to talk through problems before they turned into wars. Up until this point, Germany had been strictly banned from entering this club. Other nations still viewed them as the untrustworthy losers of the conflict, unworthy of a seat. But the Locarno Pact acted as Germany's VIP ticket. By voluntarily agreeing to respect their borders, they proved to the world that they were ready to play by international rules. In 1926, the doors finally opened. Germany was officially welcomed into the League of Nations as a respected, permanent member of the global community. This wave of global relief and optimism became known as the Spirit of Locarno. It kicked off a golden era where the threat of war faded into the background, replaced by a genuine hope for the future. Sadly, this era of goodwill did not last forever. Less than 15 years later, the neighborhood would be torn apart again by the outbreak of the Second World War. Yet the Locarno Pact remains a vital lesson in diplomacy. It shows us that sustainable peace can never be built by humiliating and punishing your enemies. It only works through opsi samjata, mutual respect and voluntary agreement.